My name is Brenda Carney. I am 46 years old and I live in Richmond, Virginia. Most days are quiet for me. I work as an archivist for a local historical society, surrounded by the dust motes dancing in sunbeams and the hushed whispers of the past. My life is one of careful preservation, of ensuring things are in their right place, documented, and understood. Order is important to me. It makes the world feel manageable. I am generally a private person, not one for grand pronouncements or public spectacles. But I am also someone who observes, who notices the subtle cracks in the facade of politeness, the quiet prejudices people hold just beneath the surface. I've seen them in colleagues, in casual acquaintances, even in family members. And I've usually dealt with them by simply creating distance, by filing them away in my internal catalog of things to avoid. It felt like the most pragmatic approach. Pick your battles, the saying goes. And honestly, I did not have the energy for most battles. One such acquaintance is Mark. I knew Mark loosely through a community garden group years ago, and we remained friends on social media, the kind where you scroll past their posts 99% of the time without a second thought. I knew, even back then, that Mark held some rather unpleasant views. Little comments slipped out, barbed jokes, casual dismissals of people who were different from him. I always felt a ripple of disgust when he spoke like that, a quiet sense of unease. I classified him, in my internal archive, under avoid if possible, exhibits latent bigotry. It was enough to know, enough to steer clear. My motivation for dealing with Mark was always just that, avoidance and quiet validation of my own judgment. I saw the ugliness in him, and keeping my distance felt like the cleanest way to keep myself unsullied. I certainly never expected to confront him, let alone become entangled in a public mess because of him. But then came the post. It was a Tuesday evening. I was sitting on my small porch, the humid Richmond air thick and heavy, scrolling through my Facebook feed, watching the world go by. Most of it was harmless: photos of dinners, updates about pets, shared articles about local events. And then I saw it. It was a meme Mark had shared. A truly vile, aggressively homophobic meme. It used slurs, it mocked the very existence of gay people, it was dripping with contempt and hate. My stomach churned. That familiar ripple of disgust surged, but this time it was sharper, more violent. It wasn't just latent prejudice anymore. This was loud. This was public. This was something he felt comfortable broadcasting to his entire social network. The shock hit me first. Shock that anyone I knew, even loosely, would post something so openly hateful. Then came the wave of nausea, the kind that makes you feel physically ill. This wasn't just Mark being subtly awful in a corner. This was Mark shouting his hate from the rooftops. My fingers hesitated over the scroll bar. My usual instinct was to ignore it, to block him, to simply delete the sight of it from my feed and my mind. That was my go-to coping mechanism for things that disrupted my sense of order. But something was different this time. The sheer audacity, the casual cruelty of it, felt like a direct assault on the quiet dignity I believed everyone deserved. It felt personal, not because I was the target, but because I knew him, and seeing him reveal this depth of ugliness publicly made me feel implicated somehow. Like my prior silence, my mere avoidance had tacitly allowed this to fester. The disgust intensified, burning hot in my chest. It wasn't just about Mark anymore, it was about the principle. It was about seeing something so clearly wrong and doing nothing. My quiet sense of validation about his character turned into a loud alarm bell demanding action. I needed to distance myself not just physically, but symbolically. I needed to make it clear, unequivocally, that this was not okay, that I did not condone it, and that there were consequences for spewing such hate into the world. My mind raced. What could I do? A comment. Too easily deleted, too easily lost in the inevitable arguments. Reporting it, Facebook's track record was spotty at best. A private message, he'd probably just deny it or double down, then an idea sparked. It wasn't born of careful planning, but of that sudden surge of resourceful energy that sometimes strikes when disgust and a need for order collide. I would meet his negativity with something positive. Something that directly countered the hate he was spreading, the Trevor Project. I knew of their work supporting lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning youth, providing crisis intervention and suicide prevention services. A beacon of hope and support for the very people his meme attacked. Without overthinking it, driven by that powerful wave of feeling, I opened a new tab. I navigated to the Trevor Project's website. I found the donation page. My hands moved quickly, filling in the details. It wasn't a huge amount. I wasn't wealthy by any means, but it felt significant. It felt like a small, tangible act of defiance, a quiet declaration that love and support were stronger than hate. As I completed the donation, another thought struck me, one that felt less about principle and more about validation. He had put his hate out there for everyone to see. Should his action pass without consequence? Should he not be made aware that his public display had a public response? Hesitantly, I returned to Facebook. I crafted a simple post. Something like, saw something disturbing and hateful online today, decided to counter it with support for those targeted, donated to the Trevor Project. And then came the moment of decision, the first real tug of war with my own moral compass. The Reddit post I read later called it classy revenge. Was what I was about to do classy? Probably not in the strictest sense of the word. But was it necessary? Did he deserve to see the direct result of his hateful action, fueled by the lingering disgust, and perhaps a nascent, unfamiliar impulse for public accountability? I took a deep breath. I added his name to the post, tagging him, not in the text itself but in the tag friends option. It was subtle but effective. It meant he would be notified. It meant his friends, if they saw his name tagged on my post, might see the juxtaposition of his hate and my response. Saw something disturbing and hateful online today, decided to counter it with support for those targeted, donated to the Trevor Project, feeling hopeful. I tagged Mark Carney, not his real name, but let's call him that for the story. I hit post. The immediate aftermath was silence on my end, but I knew the fuse was lit. I knew he would see it. My heart hammered a little in my chest. Was this wise? Was this my quiet, order-loving self? Or was this the part of me that had been quietly disgusted for too long finally boiling over? It felt like a significant step away from my usual avoidance, a leap into something messier. I tried to go back to my quiet evening, to the book I had been reading, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept drifting to my phone. I was anticipating his reaction, dreading it, but also strangely ready for it. I had finally acted on that long-held awareness of his underlying prejudice. I had publicly stated where I stood, and subtly but clearly linked it to his actions. The stage was set, and I knew, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that Act 1 was over and the struggle was about to begin. The quiet life I cherished felt, for the first time in a long time, genuinely threatened by the public storm I had just invited. My desire to simply distance myself had morphed into something far more confrontational. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. The first notification pinged on my phone less than an hour later. It was a comment on my Facebook post. From Mark. I braced myself, unlocking the screen. His initial comment was deceptively mild, dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, how virtuous, Brenda. Virtue signaling much." That was just the opening shot. The comments started coming faster then, a flurry of notifications that shattered the peaceful evening air. Mark was escalating rapidly. His initial sarcasm dissolved into outright fury. He wasn't just commenting, he was ranting in my comments section. His words were a torrent of abuse. He called my donation a pathetic attempt to seem woke. He accused me of being judgmental, of being preachy, of twisting his intentions. He defended his meme, claiming it was just a joke or free speech, or what everyone really thinks anyway. His language became increasingly foul, laced with the very slurs his meme had celebrated. He seemed utterly incapable of seeing anything beyond his own perceived victimhood, the victim of my attack on his right to post hateful content. I sat on the porch swing, the evening breeze doing nothing to cool the heat rising in my face. My phone felt heavy in my hand, a portal to this rapidly unfolding public train wreck. Disgust warred with a kind of morbid fascination. He was proving everything I had ever suspected about him, but doing it with a volume and vulgarity I hadn't fully anticipated. He was truly losing his mind, airing all his ugliest thoughts for anyone scrolling through my post to see. Friends, acquaintances, even some people I barely knew started reacting. Some liked my original post, a silent show of support. Others started commenting themselves, defending me or challenging Mark directly. The comments section became a battleground, a chaotic digital brawl centered around my quiet act of donating $10. My moral conflict intensified. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction. Yes, this was messy, but he was digging his own grave with every angry, hateful word he typed. He was exposing himself for exactly what he was. My initial instinct about his prejudice was being validated in the most public way imaginable. This was the distancing I had sought, made explicit and undeniable. Nobody seeing this exchange could possibly associate me with his views, but another part of me felt deeply uncomfortable. This wasn't the classy revenge I had vaguely conceived of. This was public humiliation, raw and ugly. His comments were genuinely hurtful, not just to me, but to anyone who might see them, particularly members of the community he was attacking. And while I hadn't made him rant, I had provided the stage. Was I responsible for the intensity of his meltdown? Was I responsible for the negativity flooding my own page? I tried, briefly, to de-escalate. I posted a comment saying something calm about agreeing to disagree and wishing for respectful discourse. It was naive. Mark's response was another explosion, accusing me of being condescending, of pretending to be superior. He was beyond reason. The digital fight spilled into the next day. The notifications were relentless. Every time I opened my phone, there was a fresh tirade from Mark or a new comment from someone else jumping in. It was exhausting. My focus at work was shot. I kept checking, morbidly drawn to the spectacle, my stomach in knots. My key traits were in a constant state of friction. My inherent disgust with his behavior was the fuel, but my resourcefulness was being tested not in crafting a plan, but in simply managing the chaos. And my moral conflict was a constant, dull ache. Was this worth it? Had I gone too far? Was I enjoying his public unraveling a little too much? That last question sat particularly heavy, a dark little secret in the back of my mind. One evening, after another particularly venomous comment from Mark, I felt myself hit rock bottom. I wasn't just tired, I was emotionally depleted. The constant negativity was seeping into my own mood, making me irritable and anxious. Friends were messaging me privately, expressing concern or amusement. It felt like my carefully ordered life had been invaded by a hostile force, and I didn't know how to repel it without becoming just as ugly as the invader. Mark's latest comment ended with something defiant. He said he wasn't backing down. He said he was waiting for my rebuttal. He seemed to think this was a debate, a back-and-forth argument he was winning through sheer volume and aggression. Sitting there, feeling drained and defeated, reading his challenge, something shifted. A rebuttal, an argument, that wasn't my strength. My strength wasn't in fighting fire with fire. It was in quiet, determined action. It was in finding a better way, a way that affirmed my values and undermined his, without descending into the mud with him. His demand for a rebuttal felt like a gauntlet thrown down. But I didn't have to pick it up and wield it like a sword. I could pick it up and transform it. That's when the second idea came, the bigger one, the one that felt truly resourceful. A donation was good. A public post about it was better. But an entire fundraiser, that would be a rebuttal he couldn't shout down. That would be a positive force directly opposing his negativity, using his own actions as the unfortunate, unwilling inspiration. The idea began to take shape in my mind. A fundraiser for the Trevor Project. I would link it explicitly to the reason why countering hate, supporting vulnerable youth, and I would make sure he knew about it. I would use his public outburst, his demand for a rebuttal, as the very catalyst for something good and significant. This wasn't just about distancing myself anymore. It was about leveraging his ugliness for a greater purpose. It was still driven by my disgust and validated judgment, but now it was channeled into proactive creation rather than reactive defense. But the moral conflict lingered. The Reddit post mentioned wanting it to be classy, but being unable to resist including the guy's name. How could I do a fundraiser inspired by his hate without making it about him? How could I link it to him without encouraging people to harass him, which I genuinely did not want? I wanted justice, not a mob. This was the tightrope walk. This was where my resourcefulness had to navigate the tricky terrain of public accountability and personal ethics. The idea was powerful, a true counterpoint to his hate, but the execution would require careful thought. It had to be clear why the fundraiser existed, linking it back to the inciting incident while keeping the focus on the positive goal, supporting the Trevor Project. I spent the next few days researching fundraising platforms, drafting text, thinking about how to phrase the story. The chaos on my Facebook post had died down somewhat, but the memory of the onslaught, the feeling of hitting rock bottom was fresh. It fueled my resolve. His demand for a rebuttal wouldn't get an argument, it would get action. Significant action. My internal monologue was busy. Could I really pull this off? What if nobody donated? What if it just reignited the public fight? What if he somehow found a way to sabotage it? The fear was there, but beneath it was a growing sense of purpose. This felt like the right response, the one that aligned with my values, the one that turned something ugly into something potentially beautiful. This felt like the true path to distancing myself from his world and affirming my own. The struggle had pushed me to a place where quiet avoidance was no longer enough. It had driven me to embrace my role, however conflicted, as the person who would force a reckoning. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. Rising from that low point felt less like a sudden leap and more like a slow, deliberate climb. The exhaustion of the public fight still lingered, a heavy blanket I had to shrug off each morning. But the idea of the fundraiser had planted a seed of purpose, and I clung to it. Mark wanted a rebuttal, he would get one. Not a shouted argument in comments, but a structured, positive action that directly challenged his hate by supporting the very people he had targeted. My disgust hadn't vanished, it had solidified into resolve. My sense of validation about his character now fueled a need to publicly repudiate him in the most effective way I could devise. My resourcefulness kicked into high gear. I spent hours poring over different online fundraising platforms. Which one was easiest to use? Which had the lowest fees? Which allowed me to tell the story clearly? I settled on one that felt reputable and user-friendly. Next came the writing. How do I explain the genesis of this fundraiser without being purely vindictive? How do I tell the story of the hateful meme and Mark's subsequent meltdown in my comments without making him the sole focus? This was where my moral conflict was most acute. I wanted the fundraiser to succeed, to raise real money for a vital cause. That was the primary goal, the classy part of the revenge. But I also wanted it to be clear why this fundraiser existed. I wanted Mark, and anyone else who saw it, to understand that his public display of hate had catalyzed something positive and powerful. I couldn't help myself. The desire for public accountability, for him to be undeniably linked to this countermovement, was too strong. I decided to tell the story factually but focus on the impact. I wrote about seeing a deeply disturbing and hateful post targeting the LGBTQ+ community. I described feeling shocked and appalled by the public display of prejudice. I mentioned my initial small donation, and then I described the subsequent online harassment I received from the person who posted the meme, explaining how their demand for a rebuttal had inspired me to think bigger. I wrestled with whether to name him directly in the fundraiser description. The Reddit post I'd read that gave me this idea mentioned the conflict about including the name. It felt less classy, more personal. But if I didn't name him, how would anyone who saw his original post or his meltdown connect the dots? How would he connect the dots in a way that felt like a direct consequence? I compromised. I didn't use his full name everywhere, but I made it clear it was initiated by a specific, public online incident involving a named individual who had expressed hateful views and then harassed me for my response. On social media posts linking to the fundraiser, I planned to be more direct, using his name as I had in the initial post, ensuring the connection was undeniable. This felt like navigating the moral tightrope, focusing the campaign on the positive cause, but using the antagonist's actions as the undeniable origin story. The description emphasized the positive mission of the Trevor Project and the urgent need to support vulnerable youth facing discrimination. It was about hope, not hate. But the backstory, the why, was firmly rooted in Mark's behavior. I set a fundraising goal that felt ambitious but achievable. It wasn't just a few $100s, I wanted it to be significant enough to feel like a real counterpoint to his negativity. Finally, the plan was ready. The fundraiser page was live, the description was written. Now came the execution, the moment of truth. I drafted a new Facebook post. This one was different from the first. It was calm, measured, and focused on the positive. Turning something ugly into something good, I wrote. I shared the link to the fundraiser. I reiterated the mission of the Trevor Project. And then I tagged him again, Mark Carney, and I added a simple line. This fundraiser was inspired by a recent online incident where hateful content was posted and my response to it led to harassment. Instead of engaging in negativity, let's channel that energy into supporting a vital cause. I hit post. My heart hammered, just like the first time, but this time it was mixed with determination. This was my rebuttal. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Notifications flooded in, but this time they were different. Likes, shares, comments expressing support, outrage at the original incident, even from people who hadn't seen it but understood the context from my description, and most importantly, donations. People started giving. $10 here, $20 there, $50 from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Each donation felt like a small victory against the tide of hate Mark had tried to unleash. Mark saw it, of course. The notifications would have told him. His reaction wasn't the immediate, furious tirade of the first time. There was a delay. I imagined him seeing it, his face contorting, realizing that his attempt to bully me into silence had backfired spectacularly. His demand for a rebuttal had resulted in a public campaign for a cause he despised, with his own name implicitly or explicitly linked as the catalyst. When he did comment on the fundraiser post, his tone was different. It was less outright rage and more sputtering indignation. He accused me of exploiting him, of using him for attention. He seemed genuinely bewildered that his hateful actions had resulted in this. His embarrassment was palpable, even through text. His friends who had seen his previous meltdown were either silent or actively joining the fundraiser. The social dynamic had shifted. He was no longer just arguing with me, he was standing against a wave of positive support for a cause spurred by his own behavior. The fundraiser gained traction. People shared it widely. It was the story, the hateful post, the meltdown, the decision to counter hate with positive action that resonated. My resourcefulness in creating the platform and telling the story had paid off. As the donations climbed past the initial goal, then doubled, then tripled, I felt a sense of vindication, not just for myself, but for the principle of standing up against hate. The revenge wasn't about causing Mark physical or financial harm. It was about taking his moment of public ugliness and transforming it into a force for good, using his own actions as the unwelcome, yet undeniable foundation. His public embarrassment, his inability to silence the movement he had unwittingly started, was his consequence. He was trapped by his own behavior, forced to witness the positive outcome it had generated. The aftermath was a complex mix of feelings. There was immense satisfaction in seeing the numbers rise, knowing that money was going to the Trevor Project because of this. There was relief that the public spectacle seemed to have a definitive, positive outcome. Mark eventually went quiet, no longer ranting in my comments, his social media presence becoming noticeably subdued. The wave had passed over him, but the moral conflict didn't entirely disappear. Had I been classy? By some definitions, no. I had intentionally linked him to the situation, knowing it would cause him discomfort and public shame. Was that truly the high road? I wrestled with it. Ultimately, I decided that forcing accountability, forcing someone to confront the public consequence of their hateful actions, while channeling the energy into something undeniably good, felt like a form of justice, messy as it was. It wasn't about tearing him down, it was about building something up in direct defiance of what he represented. My life didn't return entirely to its quiet, pre-Mark meme state. The experience had changed me. I was less inclined to just file away injustices and more willing to engage, though hopefully with more foresight and less messiness in the future. My understanding of my own resourcefulness had deepened, showing me I could create positive change even from negative situations. And my moral compass felt tested, but ultimately clearer. I had chosen action over avoidance, and while the path was difficult, the destination, tangible support for a vulnerable community and a public repudiation of hate felt right. The fundraiser eventually closed, having raised a significant amount. I sent a final update to the donors, thanking them and reiterating the importance of the cause. The whole saga, from meme to fundraiser, felt complete. Mark was a ghost in my digital past now, a reminder of the public storm and the unexpected ways quiet lives can intersect with loud hate. Looking back, it wasn't the revenge of cinematic thrillers, no intricate plot to ruin his life. It was simpler, messier, and perhaps, because it channeled negativity into positive action, ultimately more powerful. It was taking his attempt to spread darkness and using it to light a lamp for others. And if anyone asks me about it, about whether it was classy or not, I simply explain what happened. And I make sure they know about the Trevor Project, about the vital work they do. Because that, in the end, is the part that truly matters. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily.